On January 20, 2025, Donald Trump stood before a joint session of Congress and declared that the United States would reclaim the Panama Canal, citing what he described as Chinese control of the waterway's port facilities and what he called Panama's foolish decision to join China's Belt and Road Initiative in 2017. Within 48 hours, Panama's President José Raúl Mulino had formally rejected the claim, calling it a violation of Panamanian sovereignty. China's foreign ministry called Trump's statements groundless and irresponsible, and shipping company executives around the world were briefing their boards on contingency plans for a waterway that handles 5% of global container shipping and 40% of U.S. East Coast grain exports. A canal built by America, given away by America, is now at the center of America's most consequential infrastructure dispute in decades. The specific Chinese company at the center of Trump's claim is Hutchison Ports, a Hong Kong-based conglomerate owned by billionaire Li Ka-shing, which has operated port facilities at Balboa on the Pacific end and Cristobal on the Atlantic end of the canal since 1997, when Panama awarded the 25-year concession. Hutchison is not a state-owned Chinese company. It is a private Hong Kong entity that operates ports in over 50 countries, including the United Kingdom, Germany, Australia, and Mexico. Trump's claim that Hutchison represents Chinese government control is contested by multiple analyses. What is accurate is that Hutchison handles the dominant share of container traffic through the canal's terminal facilities, and that the Panama Canal Authority, which actually governs the waterway, is a Panamanian government body with no Chinese involvement in its operations or management. The canal handles approximately 13,000 vessel transits per year, approximately 36 ships per Dalton Y. In volume terms, it carries roughly 3% of global maritime trade. But that 3% figure obscures its disproportionate strategic importance. For the United States East Coast, the canal is the primary route for grain exports to Asia, manufactured goods imports from Asia, and the transit of U.S. Navy vessels between the Atlantic and Pacific. For South American exporters, it is the primary route to Asian markets. For liquid natural gas exporters, the expanded Neo-Panamax locks, which opened in 2016, have made the canal the critical link in American LNG exports to Asian buyers. The canal's 3% of global trade is not uniformly distributed. It is concentrated exactly where it matters most. In 2024, the canal faced a crisis that had nothing to do with geopolitics. A severe drought caused by El Niño reduced water levels in Gatun Lake, the artificial lake that provides both the water for the locks and the drinking water for Panama City, to the lowest level in decades. At the lake's lowest point, the Canal Authority was forced to restrict daily transits from the normal 36 to as few as 18 vessels per Dalton Y. Ships were required to reduce their cargo loads to decrease draft. A queue of over 150 vessels built up at both ends. The waiting time for non-priority vessels reached 22 days. The drought demonstrated something that the geopolitical debate around Chinese port operators often obscures. The canal's most immediate vulnerability is not human adversaries. It is climate. Before we examine the canal's full history, economics, and strategic significance, one number should be held in mind. The alternative to the Panama Canal for a vessel traveling from New York to Los Angeles is a voyage around Cape Horn, the southern tip of South America. That alternative route adds approximately 14,000 kilometers to the journey. At normal cargo vessel speeds, that is an additional 18 to 22 days of sailing. The additional fuel cost, crew cost, and time cost of that detour, multiplied by the 13,000 vessels that use the canal annually, is the precise measure of what the canal is worth, not the toll revenue, not the trade volume. The alternative route, that is the canal's value. It erases 20 days and 14,000 kilometers from the world's maritime map. The Panama Canal is not a channel cut through flat land. It is a water staircase, a system that lifts ships 86 feet above sea level, using a series of locks, carries them across an artificial lake, and then lowers them back down on the other side. This is not the obvious design. The obvious design, which the French attempted first, was a sea-level canal, simply cut through the isthmus from one ocean to the other, as was done at Suez. The French spent 9 years and $400 million on this approach, killed 22,000 workers primarily through malaria and yellow fever, and failed completely. When the Americans took over in 1904, their chief engineer John Stevens made the decision that saved the project: build a lake, build a dam, build the locks. The French dug down. The Americans built up. Before the Americans could dig a single cubic meter of rock, they had to solve the problem that had killed the French: tropical disease. Malaria and yellow fever had killed approximately 22,000 French workers and had broken the will of France's greatest engineering enterprise. Dr. William Gorgas, the U.S. Army's chief sanitation officer, implemented the most aggressive mosquito eradication campaign in history in 1905 and 1906. He drained standing water across the entire Canal Zone, fumigated every building, introduced window screens and running water, and eliminated the Aedes aegypti mosquito population that carried yellow fever. Within 2 years, yellow fever was essentially eliminated from the Canal Zone. It was one of the most significant public health achievements of the 20th century, and almost nobody outside Panama knows his name. The excavation of the canal, once the disease problem was solved, became the largest earth-moving operation in human history to that date. Over the 10 years of American construction, approximately 232 million cubic meters of material were removed from the isthmus. The primary method, steam shovels, over 100 of them working simultaneously in the Culebra, cut alone. The primary challenge, the rock slides. The geology of the Culebra cut was inherently unstable. As material was removed, the weight on adjacent slopes shifted, and the walls repeatedly collapsed. The slides could deposit more material in a single collapse than workers could remove in a week. The engineer's response was to keep digging, widening the cut rather than deepening it, accepting the slides as a permanent feature of the work rather than a crisis to be solved. The excavation took 10 years. Without the slides, it might have taken 5. The human cost of the American construction phase, 1904 to 1914, was approximately 5,600 deaths, predominantly among West Indian and Caribbean workers, who formed the majority of the labor force. Added to the French phase fatalities of approximately 22,000, the total cost of the canal's construction was approximately 27,000 human lives. The workers who died were not Americans. They were primarily Barbadian, Jamaican, and other Caribbean immigrants who were paid lower wages than American workers, housed in segregated facilities, and given the most dangerous work assignments. The canal's history acknowledges their labor. It has been slower to acknowledge the specific conditions of racial hierarchy under which that labor was extracted. The canal opened on August 15, 1914, 10 years after American construction began, on the exact week that WI's opening battles were being fought in Europe. The world's most significant engineering achievement opened at precisely the moment the world's attention was entirely elsewhere. The first commercial transit, the SS Ancon, a cargo ship, carrying a load that included cement and barbed wire. The dignitaries who would have gathered to celebrate were distracted by a continent going to war. The canal opened quietly. Its transformation of global maritime geography was immediate and permanent. The United States did not simply build the Panama Canal. It created the country that the canal runs through. Before 1903, Panama was a province of Colombia. The U.S. wanted the canal route. Colombia's Senate refused to ratify the Hay-Herran Treaty that would have granted the U.S. canal rights. In response, the United States supported, and specifically facilitated, a Panamanian independence movement. When Panama declared independence on November 3, 1903, the U.S. warship USS Nashville was positioned in Colon Harbor to prevent Colombian forces from landing to suppress the revolt. 14 days later, the Hay-Herran Treaty was signed, giving the United States sovereign control over a 10-mile-wide canal zone in perpetuity, in exchange for $10 million and an annual payment of $250,000 to Panama. The man who signed for Panama was not Panamanian. He was a French engineer named Philippe Bunau Varilla, who had been appointed Panama's envoy to Washington, despite never having lived in Panama. The Canal Zone, the 10-mile-wide American territory bisecting Panama, was, for 50 years, a visible colonial enclave inside a sovereign country. American civilians lived in the zone under American law, American schools, American retail prices, and American governance, while Panamanians living immediately beside the zone lived under completely different conditions. The zone had its own police, its own courts, its own commissaries that sold American goods at American prices unavailable to Panamanians. The tension this created exploded on January 9, 1964, a day Panamanians called Dia de los Martires, Martyrs' Day, when Panamanian students attempted to raise their national flag in the zone alongside the American flag. American students tore it down. 3 days of riots followed. 22 Panamanians and 4 American soldiers were killed. Panama broke diplomatic relations with the United States. the day is still a national holiday in Panama. The 1964 riots made Panamanian sovereignty over the canal an unavoidable political reality for every subsequent American administration. President Carter, who understood the strategic and moral dimensions of the issue more clearly than his predecessors, negotiated the Torrijos-Carter Treaties of 1977, which committed the United States to transferring full control of the canal to Panama by December 31, 1999. The treaties were ratified by the U.S. Senate by a margin of only one vote above the required two-thirds majority. Ronald Reagan opposed them, calling the canal ours and declaring America should not give it away. At noon on December 31, 1999, the Panamanian flag was raised over the Canal Authority headquarters. The canal transfer was peaceful, orderly, and effective. By every measurable operational metric, the canal has been better managed under Panamanian control than under American control. The Panamanian Canal Authority has achieved something that American management did not. It has consistently increased canal capacity and efficiency while maintaining safety. Annual transits have grown from approximately 13,000 in the early 2000s to over 14,000 today. The landmark achievement under Panamanian management was the expansion project completed in 2016, the construction of a third set of locks, the new Panamax or Neo-Panamax locks, at a cost of $5.4 billion, financed by Panama without American financial assistance. The new locks can accommodate vessels more than 3 times the size of vessels the original locks could handle, opening the canal to the largest container ships and LNG tankers in the world. Panama built what America could have built for 60 years and chose not to. Trump's 2025 claim to take back the canal faces one obstacle that his political framing does not acknowledge. Panama's management of the canal is objectively superior to its American predecessor. The canal runs at a profit, returning hundreds of millions of dollars annually to the Panamanian treasury. Its safety record is exemplary. Its traffic management is efficient. Its expansion was financed, built, and completed on schedule. There is no operational argument for American reacquisition. There is only a geopolitical argument about who operates the port facilities at the canal's ends and what that means for American strategic interests. That argument deserves examination, but it should not be confused with the operational one. The Panama Canal Authority collected approximately $4 billion in toll revenue in fiscal year 2023, its highest in history. The toll structure is based on vessel type, cargo, and size, with the largest Neo-Panamax container ships paying tolls exceeding $1 million per transit. This revenue flows entirely to Panama, to the national treasury, to infrastructure investment, and to social programs. The canal contributes approximately 9% of Panama's GDP, making it the single most economically significant infrastructure asset of any country in the developing world relative to national income. Panama's GDP per capita, approximately $17,000, the highest in Central America, is substantially explained by this revenue stream. The canal did not just connect 2 oceans, it created one of the most prosperous countries in its region. The canal's strategic economic importance to the United States is specific and concentrated. U.S. trade accounts for approximately 67% of total canal traffic, making America the canal's largest single user by a significant margin. The commodities flowing through in the American direction include grain, primarily corn and soybeans, from the U.S. Midwest to Asian markets, manufactured goods from Asia to the U.S. East Coast, and liquefied natural gas from the U.S. Gulf Coast to Asia. The canal's 2016 expansion, enabling Neo-Panamax vessels, was partly motivated by the growth of American LNG exports, which required larger LNG carriers than the original locks could accommodate. America's farmers, manufacturers, and energy exporters depend on the canal more than any other nation's equivalent sectors. The canal is more American in its economic use than it has been in its political ownership since 1999. The Hutchison port's operations at Balboa and Cristobal, the specific Chinese-controlled facilities at the center of Trump's concern, handle container terminal operations at the 2 ends of the canal. They do not control the canal's locks, water management, vessel scheduling, traffic separation, or toll collection, all of which remain exclusively with the Panamanian Canal Authority. What Hutchison does control is the loading and unloading of containers at the specific terminal facilities that adjoin the canal's 2 ends. The strategic concern, which is legitimate and not simply invented, is that a hostile actor with control over port terminals could theoretically disrupt container flows, gather intelligence on U.S. military vessel movements through the canal, or provide information advantage to an adversary in a conflict scenario. This is a real security consideration, but it is a consideration about port terminals, not about the canal. In January 2025, following Trump's statements, Hutchison Ports announced it was in discussions to sell its Panama Canal port concessions to a consortium that included BlackRock, the American asset management firm, effectively removing the Chinese corporate presence from the canal's terminal operations. The announcement was described by the Trump administration as a victory. Panama's government noted that any transfer of the concession required Panamanian government approval and would be governed by Panamanian law. The situation as of May 2026 remains in negotiation. What the episode demonstrates is that the canal's strategic politics are being resolved through the same mechanism that built it: financial leverage and sovereign negotiation, not military action. The canal's history is a history of power exercised through contracts and money, not tanks and troops. That pattern appears to be holding. The Panama Canal is not simply an industrial waterway. It passes through one of the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth, the Central American rainforest that forms the Continental Divide. The creation of Gatun Lake in 1913, by flooding a valley to create the water reservoir that makes the lock system possible, produced what was then the largest artificial lake in the world, and inadvertently created one of the most remarkable wildlife refuges in the Western Hemisphere. The rising waters isolated hilltops into islands, protecting their animal populations from predators. Barrow, Colorado Island, the largest of these, became a biological research station in 1923 and is today one of the most intensively studied tropical forest ecosystems on Earth. Scientists from around the world visit to study the same forest that the canal's construction inadvertently preserved. Watching a supertanker transit the Panama Canal, locks from the observation deck at the Miraflores Visitor Center, is considered by experienced travelers to be one of the most extraordinary human-made spectacles on Earth. The vessels are enormous. A Neo-Panamax container ship at full load is as long as the Empire State Building is tall. Watching one of these ships enter a lock chamber that fits it with less than a meter of clearance on each side, guided through by human operators called mules, electric locomotives on rails that pull the vessel into precise alignment, produces a specific visceral astonishment. The engineering of 1914 and the engineering of 2016 coexist in the same lock complex. The original locks and the new locks are visible simultaneously. The canal is the only place on Earth where you can watch a century of engineering working side by side. The Camino de Cruces, the ancient stone path that the Spanish used to transport Peruvian gold across the isthmus to the Atlantic, runs through the Soberania National Park alongside the canal. Hikers walking this trail today walk on the same stones that conquistadors crossed in the 16th century, carrying the gold of the Inca Empire. The trail was the original Panama crossing, predating the canal by 350 years. Parts of the original cobblestone are still visible and intact, worn smooth by centuries of use. Within 10 minutes' drive of the Miraflores Locks, one of the most heavily industrialized waterways on Earth, a traveler can be on a 16th-century cobblestone trail in primary tropical rainforest, listening to howler monkeys and watching harpy eagles. The canal's geographical setting is as extraordinary as its engineering. The city of Culen, on the Atlantic entrance to the canal, represents the canal's most painful economic contradiction. It is the city through which enormous wealth has flowed for over a century, and it is one of the poorest cities in Panama. Canal toll revenue goes to the national treasury in Panama City. Culen's residents, predominantly Afro-Panamanian, many descendants of the West Indian workers who built the canal, have seen limited economic benefit from the waterway at their door. The Culen Free Trade Zone, adjacent to the city, is the second largest free trade zone in the world after Hong Kong, handling $20 billion of commerce annually. Culen's unemployment rate is among the highest in Panama. The canal's economic benefit and the canal's geographic community are not the same thing. The city of those who built it has not been the city that profited from it. The Panama Canal faces three simultaneous challenges as it enters its second century of operation. The first is climate. Gatun Lake's water levels are projected to become increasingly unpredictable as El Niño patterns intensify, requiring significant investment in watershed management, water conservation, and potentially additional water storage infrastructure. The second is competition. The Nicaragua Canal Project, a Chinese-backed proposal for a competing waterway through Nicaragua, has been discussed for over a decade. though its construction feasibility remains highly contested and no significant construction has occurred. The third is geopolitical, the ongoing US-China competition over port terminal operations, which will reshape the investment and partnership framework within which the canal operates for the next generation. What the history of the Panama Canal teaches across its full arc from the French failure to the American construction to the Panamanian sovereignty to the present geopolitical contest is a lesson that the oil and world power series identified as the central pattern of the last century. Whoever controls the strategic passage controls the leverage. The canal's history is a demonstration that this logic applies not only to oil pipelines and oil straits, but to every concentrated point of infrastructure through which the global economy must flow. The canal's locks are a choke point as surely as the Strait of Hormuz is a choke point. The difference is that one was created by geology and one was created by engineering. The strategic logic is identical. The next episode in the Maritime Choke Points series covers the Suez Canal, the waterway that connects the Mediterranean to the Red Sea and carries approximately 12% of global trade, including 30% of global container shipping. The Suez Canal's history encompasses the British Empire's last imperial act, Egypt's most consequential act of national assertion, one of the strangest military adventures of the Cold War, and a very recent reminder, the 2021 grounding of the Ever Given, that one badly positioned ship can stop 12% of global trade for 6 days. It is also like the Panama Canal, a site of genuine natural beauty and extraordinary human history. From the ancient Egyptian canal that preceded it by 3,000 years to the cities of Port Said and Suez that grew up at its ends. 27,000 deaths, 10 years of construction, 110 years of operation, a sovereignty dispute that took 76 years and a national martyrdom to resolve, a drought that closed it more effectively than any military threat, a Chinese port operator that may or may not represent Chinese state control, and a lock system that can lift a 400-meter ship 86 feet above sea level with less than a meter of clearance on either side, guided by electric locomotives smaller than the ship's anchor chain. The Panama Canal is all of these things simultaneously: an engineering achievement, a political settlement, an ecological accident that produced a wildlife paradise, a colonial story that ended more peacefully than most, and the most extraordinary spectacle of infrastructure that the modern world has produced. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications because the story doesn't end here, it evolves. The Maritime Choke Points series continues. Episode 3, The Suez Canal, where Nasser defied an empire, where the Ever Given taught the world about supply chains, and where the future of global trade between Europe and Asia is being contested right now. The story keeps moving. So does the shipping.